Here I am again. This is slide 10 of our political action campaign project. This one is kind of self-explanatory. This is the high-level campaign strategy. So these are the bullet points to how you think you are best going to be capable of influencing and creating change in your given community. So how are you going to make the change? So I'd like you to describe the key elements of your campaign strategy. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's something that I would like you to research. So for campaign strategy, Google campaign strategy or elements of a campaign strategy. You'll probably get a lot of campaigns that are based around a candidate, but the strategy of outreach to the community, the strategies to sort of get your message out to the public and to identify supporters and to get people to volunteer to take action, those strategies are universal. So I'd like you to find the strategies that people have used in the past and then look at what's going on around us right now, right? Like the strategies that some of the grassroots movements have been using over the past decade are different than we used to see in the 70s and the 60s when it came to promoting a message, but also being politically active, right? So if we were talking about like the civil rights era, one of the strategies would be like number one would be public protests, right? And then maybe that would be like sit-ins, right? Where a group of people would go to a business and sit down where they weren't allowed, right? Black people would go to the Woolworth's lunch counter and sit and order lunch, and they would be spit on and hit and had food thrown at them, and then eventually arrested for sitting at a lunch counter where they weren't allowed. You might say marches were a big thing back in the civil rights era. Martin Luther King was arrested multiple times, not because he was black, right? But because he was parading without a license. And so that's part of Jim Crow, right? That's part of the Jim Crow era of segregation politics and law, was that black people weren't allowed to participate in civil society in a way that that allowed them to exercise their civil rights, their constitutional rights, because they really didn't have any, because laws were passed to keep them from doing so. So the First Amendment was limited severely for people of color prior to the 1960s, and still is, but not to the extent that it was, because people started disobeying unjust laws. And that's another one, civil disobedience. You're right. Yeah, it's not. Civil disobedience. So Martin Luther King said, you have a moral obligation not to follow an unjust law. Breaking unjust laws must happen in order for justice to be served. So civil disobedience is a strategy that, under public protests, can draw attention to your cause. So public protest, just one sort of aspect of your campaign strategy. Public outreach, right? Marketing, things like that, like getting the word out on social media, direct mail, email lists, everything that you are going to do to get the word out about your campaign, to persuade people to participate in some way. That's all campaign strategy, all leading up to an eventual endpoint that you have to decide. What is your ultimate goal? And so that's what you want. How are you going to get there? List the campaign strategy here. All right, get to work.